Joining us is longtime Washington, D.C. advocate John Aravosis. He's the founder of the Progressive America blog and appears daily on TikTok to offer updates on the war in Ukraine. John, welcome to the show. John, you're a leading voice on the Ukraine-Russian war. What motivated you to get involved? And tell us about your incredible work on this issue.
You know, it's funny. I think back to, I'm forgetting the lawyer that helped us on the Timothy McVeigh case, that that gay case 20 years ago. But he was interviewed by somebody, asked why he was working on it, and he said, "I don't like bullies." And I think that actually works for me as well. I think most of the civil rights work I've done, you too, by the way, I mean, I think it's the same thing. We just get sort of annoyed by bad guys beating up good guys. And having said that too, I'm old enough where I remember the Soviet Union, and the Russians are the modern day, I don't want to say incarnation, whatever word you want to use, but sort of children of the Soviet Union. And these guys they're bullies and they're dangerous. And I wanted to help.
Well, speaking of bullies, I mean, Vladimir Putin had a very tough reputation prior to this. He was, I think, miscast, though. If you look at his history, what did he do? He went to Syria, he went into Georgia, he went into Chechnya, and bombed the hell out of civilians. I think he and his military have been exposed in a lot of ways as terrorists, as bullies, and as thugs. How has this impacted the image of Putin and Russia and their military as well?
You know, huge mistake, obviously, going in for a variety of reasons in this war. But a lot of folks have said that had they not invaded, all of us still would have thought the Russians were the second greatest army in the world after the American army. You know, we respect anybody who's got a nuclear bomb, but Russia, we thought, was this great-ish world power. And now we see, I mean, I think back to John McCain. John McCain had said years ago that Russia was little more than a gas station with nukes. And in many ways, that's what they are. There's not much there.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. But were you surprised that Ukraine was able to withstand the initial assault? I think everybody in the world was. And it was one of the most inspiring stories I've ever seen, how they stood for freedom and democracy at a time right here at home in the United States where a lot of people don't appreciate their freedom and democracy. And here you have Ukraine battling they're a David battling a Goliath.
I mean, I think it's at least two main things that I think were sort of shocking. One, that they held out. You know, all of us, I thought with everybody else that the Ukrainians would get crushed, but that there would be a massive guerrilla war that we would be funding, and it could go on for 10 years. So I didn't think they were going to get crushed in that regard, but certainly everyone thought the Russians were going to roll in 3 days, it would be over, you know, sort of hearkening back to Eastern Europe. The other surprises, and I don't mean to sort of sound like a cliche, but it's true. These Ukrainians, I mean, my God, you know,
they're tough.
You know, maybe you knew some people, like I'm from Chicago, you met Ukrainians, but that was about it. And to see how good their military is, and the West trained them. But I actually talked to a former defense friend of mine, and I was talking about that. And he said, you know, we have to be careful when we say that, you know, we trained the Ukrainian military. We did. He said, but we also trained the Iraqi and the Afghan military, and they suck. There is a large factor of this is what you bring to it. And the Ukrainians brought this, I don't know, zeal and expertise. And it's been kind of amazing to watch, really.
It really has. But you know what concerns me? What keeps me up at night? That we're only a couple of weeks away from elections. And we have isolationist appeasement Republicans on the MAGA right, who are saying, oh, at a time when people are suffering in the United States and gas prices are high and bread prices are high, how could we be giving money to Ukraine? And then we had the ultimate spineless, gutless worm in Kevin McCarthy, in my view. I mean, this guy stands for nothing except power, who has signaled that he might be open to defunding the war in Ukraine, which I think would be a disaster. And I'll get into why I think in a moment. But how worried are you that in a couple of weeks, everything's going to change and this noble war fighting Putin, which of course protects the United States, will be sabotaged by MAGA Republicans taking control of Washington?
It's going to be much worse, okay? I'm not convinced that all the money is going to be cut off immediately. You know, it depends. I'm not even sure it even depends what happens in the Senate, because McConnell has been very supportive. So that's good. But what worries me is you've got in the House, you've got the appeasement MAGA pro-Putin, not even appeasement, they're pro-Putin caucus, right?
Right.
he needs their votes. I mean, McCarthy would basically have to pass future funding for Ukraine by getting Democratic votes, which he would get, but it would be kind of embarrassing for him if he were to do that. Now, he also wants to be speaker, and there is a lot of concern as to what kind of promises is he going to make behind the closed doors to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and all the rest of them, Lauren Boebert, about not helping Ukraine in the future. And finally, Trump. I mean, this all goes back to Trump. Donald Trump is the one who's the original sinner of being anti-Ukraine because he's pro-Putin, but also he believes this crazy conspiracy theory that Ukraine was conspiring with Hillary in 2016. I mean, it's crazy stuff to steal the election. So Trump, for a lot of us, Ukraine was like this country over there that we probably never planned on visiting, but it was curious, former Soviet.
Well, even if McCarthy gets the job, I mean, Donald Trump doesn't forgive very easily. And it's possible that he could sabotage McCarthy and we could get somebody even worse who's anti-Ukraine in there. And I agree with you. It goes back to Trump. I think he was caught trying to blackmail Ukraine. He got impeached over it. And I don't think he's forgotten that, nor have the MAGA crowd. And I do think that they are looking to exact revenge, which would be a disaster for the United States.
Knowing Trump, he literally wants revenge on Zelensky because he got caught trying to blackmail Zelensky. And Trump also has to double down just to prove that he's right. So he's going to do everything he can to prove that Zelensky is bad and Ukraine's bad. And it's dangerous as hell. It's dangerous. I mean, obviously, Trump is dangerous on so many levels.
Well, there's also isolationists in Europe, and they're protesting right now, and appeasers in Europe. And winter hasn't even started yet. We're going to be getting higher gas prices. People are going to, in some cases, need to warm up with blankets. This also concerns me. How do you think European resolve is going to hold up over the winter? Or do you think they're going to start backtracking and joining the Marjorie Taylor Greene crowd?
I was reading something today saying that the Europeans actually have done a very good job in terms of their the gas supplies, natural gas. So actually, they may be okay for the winter. The bigger issue is going to be the price because, the price has gone up a lot, oil as well, and you can't really insulate yourself from that, even if you use domestic supplies. The price is global. So the price goes up globally, it goes up domestically. That's going to be an issue. It probably depends on where, right? The Brits are going to be amazing because the Brits have been amazing on this. The French have been pretty good. The Germans, well, what's funny with the Germans too? It's been I shouldn't say this. It's the government. The German government and the French government have been right? We now know with there's a new Italian government that's basically fascist. They could be a concern. It's not clear that the people are as much a concern as the governments themselves, I fear, at this point.
Here's one thing I think is going to happen, and it's going to be, again, calamitous. I believe if we back off the United States and Europe of funding Ukraine for this war, I believe that sends a message to a newly empowered Xi in China to attack Taiwan, because his calculus is going to be, if they're not willing to defend a democracy in their own backyard, literally bordering these countries, there's no way in hell they're going to defend a democracy, an island across the world, which is going to be much more difficult. I could see that being a consequence of backing off funding Ukraine.
Yes. It's look at Afghanistan. Okay. I fault Biden and I don't fault Biden. It's funny. I voted for Biden. I'm very iffy on Biden on a lot of this stuff. He's no Barack Obama. Well, let's put it that way. But it was Trump's deal. It was Trump's agreement to withdraw from Afghanistan. Trump withdrew most of our troops from Afghanistan. By the time Biden got there were very few troops left, actually. And it was Trump's deal that he implemented. But I do think he did a bad job pulling us out. It looked chaotic, and it looked like, America running with their tails between their legs. And if I were China, looking and going, look at the chaos that was. No American president wants to go through that again. Meaning from China's perspective, they wouldn't want to get involved in foreign affairs. Now, having said that, look what's happened in Ukraine to date. If I were China, I'd be worried, frankly, because to date, the whole world got together. We got together in a much more cohesive way than expected. We passed sanctions that nobody thought we could get. That the world would come together on this. And China cares about their economy more than anything. This would be devastating to China's economy if we did the same kind of sanctions to them. So that's great. But as you said, the concern I would have is, what if we all just crumble and China then goes, well, they were good for a year taking on Russia, and then they caved. All we have to do is weather 1 year of them taking Taiwan, and, then we'll be fine.
What also concerns me when it comes to China is that they will look at this and believe that the world is on their side. Like the things are changing. It's moving in their authoritarian direction. And that's going to embolden them. I mean, I think economic concerns generally with China have been their number one concern. But I think with Xi, it's different. I think he's more like Putin and is showing these colors that he's more concerned with the greatness of China as Russia is with a greater Russia. And Ukraine, I think, is that front. And if that crumbles, I think we are going to war in China. I really do think that he's made that a priority, and that could be the outcome of this. What also concerns me, though, if that happens and we back off with Ukraine, Russia gets Ukraine and China attacks Taiwan, the U.S. becomes more authoritarian, and that also we see the same thing in Europe. We could suddenly live in a very brutal world with spheres of influence, without democracy, without decency or human rights. A world potentially based on repression, lies, totalitarianism, and conspiracies, kind of like the Republican Party today. What does that look like if Russia digests Ukraine? I mean, what happens to the world then?
It depends what position we take. If you get the Trump approach and we become more authoritarian, then I worry that the spheres of influence aren't like the Soviet days, the Cold War days, where there was the freedom sphere of influence and the dictatorship freedom. And with, mind you, with we supported some bad guys, there was that. But nonetheless, you get something with Trump where we're actually joined with Russia as co-totalitarians or co-authoritarians, so that we're actually part of the sphere of influence of the bad guys.
That's what I'm afraid of. There's going to be nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, the entire world.
There's nowhere to go because what? It's going to be Canada. It's going to be, Handmaid's Tale. It's going to be Canada.
Yes. And I think it'll embolden the European far right. And I think we just saw what happened in Sweden, and you mentioned Italy earlier. I think that's going to happen to many other countries in Europe if fold on Ukraine and we have the Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Donald Trump crowd in Washington running the show. There's going to be nowhere safe. And that is why this is such an important fight to me. If you could look into a crystal ball, how do we get out of this in the best possible way in Ukraine?
I mean, best possible way, I think, is obvious, which is that Ukraine gets their territory back and the Russians have an Afghanistan moment, their Afghanistan, not ours, moment where they go, you know what, we've been fighting this too long. We've lost too many men. The people at home are getting too pissed off, and we've got to just pull out and leave. I mean, that would be the best case. It could be something where Putin gets overthrown. It could be where Putin gets threatened with being overthrown. What I worry about is, and again, I am much more hawkish on this than I think Joe Biden is. Biden worries me as far as worrying a little bit too much about what Vladimir Putin thinks. Having said that, I care about what Putin thinks to the degree that the war has to end at some point, and Putin could just keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And I don't know where that stops. And in the meantime, he goes on 10 years and he just keeps killing Ukrainians, killing children, destroying their infrastructure. Now, if the Ukrainians want to keep fighting, I'm with them. I just worry as to what gets Putin to stop. But having said that, that does not mean we appease the man and say, well, since you're willing to keep fighting, I guess we'll just give you everything you want, or we'll give you half of Ukraine. I mean, this is the problem with the folks who keep wanting to sort of negotiate. When Elon Musk, when they throw out negotiations and peace plans, their peace plans are always, you're being mugged. Why don't you give the mugger half your money? And it's like, that's not a compromise.
And I don't think they understand the mindset of bullies. And the only way you stop a bully is to punch them in the nose. I mean, it's just the basic schoolyard logic, and it works. And when I've done that, it's worked in my own life. And this will only encourage Putin to reach for more, because his goal isn't to stop there, and he's going to keep testing it. And we've also seen the brutality. I mean, this is someone who has bombed women and children in playgrounds. This is somebody who is kidnapping children and relocating them to Russia, potential war crime. This is someone who bombs apartment buildings with reckless abandon.
Early in his career, or career getting on the presidential level, Putin bombed a Russian apartment building to claim it was terrorists, Chechen terrorists. But it was actually a false flag operation. I mean, you can Google this. I hate even bringing up false flags because it sounds like Alex Jones, but in this case, it's real. Putin is a thug.
I don't know where to put him on the pantheon of horrible leaders in history and evil leaders, but he's certainly on the path to becoming one of them right now. How would you rate him and the trajectory of his career?
You know what? I would say this. I think to some degree, what bothers me with the question, and I'm not knocking you, but I mean, I almost feel like it puts us into that territory again of, oh my God, he's crazy. What do we do? He's the worst ever. We better. And then the next argument is, not from you, but the next argument is, we better find a way of making him happy and giving him an off-ramp because he's just the worst of the worst. He's, I think, a totally rational, actually, Biden or somebody else said this recently. He's a totally rational guy who's made a lot of irrational decisions getting into this war, but he's rational. And right now he's trying to preserve, well, he was trying to expand his country and now he's trying to save his job and his life, but it's all rational.
I would agree it's rational, but he also doesn't have, he also doesn't shy away from killing.
But that's rational to him too, because he doesn't care.
But I wouldn't stop. I agree with you. That is a reason to go on, not go in the other direction, because you're only going to encourage somebody like that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yes.
He's brought up using nuclear weapons. Obviously, everybody's concerned about that. But how likely do you think he is to use them? And what do you think the West's response should be if he does?
I have written about this and I've talked about this a lot. And anybody who's worried about Putin using nuclear weapons has to explain why he would do it. And why he would do it is not a simple Elon Musk answer of, he'd do it because Crimea is really important, and if he loses it, he'd nuke. No. He's a head of state. He's not crazy. He's sly like a fox. Tell me why I don't mean you again. Tell me why the sly fox thinks setting off a nuclear weapon would advance his goals either at home or internationally. And I can't find an answer for that, right? He sets off a nuke and NATO and the US enter the war. We could, a lot of the generals, I think Biden's response, I'm not sure what Biden's response would be, because I think Biden still pulls punches a little too much on actually a lot of issues. Biden's a bit of a caver. I don't mean to keep knocking Biden here, but Biden kind of caves when you push against him. And so I don't know, but the generals have talked about blowing up the Russians' Black Sea Fleet, based in Crimea, going after Russian troops based all over Ukraine. I think we probably would have something more like a no-fly zone, but it would be a true no-fly zone of all of Ukraine and say, you put one plane in the air, you turn on one surface-to-air missile, you turn on one radar, and we're blowing it up. And the Ukrainian pilots can now fly all over the country and do as many bombing raids as they want on the Russians. So it's something like that. But again, that does not benefit Russia. Putin does not want us to enter the war. He can't beat Ukraine. He certainly doesn't want to be fighting America and NATO. So I worry about the talk, because the talk can lead to mistakes. Right? We keep hearing him talk about, I'm going to nuke you. And then somebody sees something on the radar. They're not sure what it is. And the Poles end up shooting a Russian plane out of the sky. I mean, you can have mistakes that lead to further escalation. But I think his job right now is to shake things up because he's losing. And the best way to do that is to scare the hell out of us about nukes. And the best way to do that is sound as irrational, as crazy as possible. And I think he's doing a good job of it. But again, one final point. People keep saying, but he's crazy. He might nuke us anyway. Well, if he's crazy, then no amount of appeasement is going to help because he's crazy. Right? Appeasement would be assuming logic and rationality. Well, if we give you this, then you'll be happy and you'll walk away. Well, if you're crazy, nothing we do can necessarily make a difference. No, I just think he's full of BS at this point. But having said that, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm right. Excuse me. But
Well, the only thing that worries me about this whole talk of he thinks he's Catherine the Great 2.0 or Peter the Great 2.0 is just sort of this. Yeah, it's a sort of delusions of grandeur. Those are the things that do concern me about him when I hear that, because that does speak to possibly crazy.
This is actually an important point to tell your audience as well. Nuclear submarines. If a nuclear war starts, we both lose. I mean, literally, America and Russia both lose. Both sides have nuclear submarines. They're impossible to hit. They have nuclear weapons. If Russia destroyed all of America, our nuclear submarines would survive and destroy them. If we destroyed all of Russia, their nuclear submarines would survive and they would destroy us. Neither side, both sides know it's the end of the world. Peter the Great means expand my country and conquer new lands, and I will be famous as the guy that restored Great Russia. If you kill 97% of your population in a nuclear war, that ain't Peter the Great. I mean, Putin cares about his legacy. He doesn't want to, on his deathbed, send off nukes. He wants to conquer countries.
Yeah, as I've said, based on their performance so far, their military's petering out, and he ain't great. I mean, that's what's happening so far.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, thank God. And actually, thank God that we've also seen how bad these guys are, because even their neighbors on the borders are starting to act up a little bit. The former Soviet countries are starting to go, you know what? Maybe we won't let you push us around as much. Maybe even the Chinese will start to distance, because the Chinese are now going, okay, your weapons suck. And actually, you're more of a, kind of a two-bit second-rate power than we thought you even were, even though we always knew Russia wasn't on the caliber with Europe and America, right? They were a nuclear power, a superpower. They were never an economic superpower. And we now know they're not a military superpower. We thought at least the military was pretty good. Now we know they're not. So
that brings me to a question on China and Xi, and that is he must be worried secretly that their military isn't as strong as it is. That's one thing about these authoritarian countries, and Russia is a perfect example of that. People lie to their leader. Oh, everything's great. Everything's wonderful. He must, in his deeper, darker moments at night when he's going to bed, say, I wonder if we're as strong as I think we are, or they're just telling me what I want to hear because I'm an authoritarian leader.
I'd never even thought of that. That's a fascinating observation.
Yeah, I mean, you think you're strong. You think that you're like looking at him and you're like, well, if they perform like this, how the hell are we going to perform? We haven't had a war. We haven't really tested our troops. And everybody's telling me yes, yes, yes. Maybe there's some no's in there I'm not hearing.
What you are saying for your audience here is a lot of what happened with the Russians is their leaders, like Putin, the big leaders, thought that all the things they ordered the military to do were actually happening. For example, they would have exercises, these great, large, exercises to scare the West. And what we found out was they weren't actually practice sessions. They weren't chances for their troops to get, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, all these different parts of the military working together and practicing. They literally would have a script, and it was more a play. I mean, this one kind of blew my mind. And literally, they would put on a play and say, okay, you're going to go here, he's going to go here. And it wasn't a military exercise. It was just performative art. And we looked at it and thought, wow, that's a beautiful exercise they did. It wasn't. The guys fighting to go to Ukraine, there was a report the other day of the guy said, we don't get to use any of the weapons at all. Shoigu, the defense minister, came by, and all of a sudden that day we had weapons practice and everyone had to pick up a gun. He goes, he left and they stopped the weapons practice. That's the kind of corruption that's happening. But they tell the senior up, oh, everyone's perfect with the weapons now. They never used it.
Right. And in fact, it's just battalion ballet. I mean, it's a performance.
Yeah. But you lie to the higher ups. And as you said, you're afraid. Well, A, you lie to the higher ups because you're stealing the money and stuff. But second of all, if you discover theft or you discover it's not happening, you don't want to be the one to tell Putin, guess what? They stole all the money. So you go, oh, yeah, everything's going great.
John, you've done amazing work. Where can people find you or listen to you and hear what you have to say?
Number one place is TikTok, but also Twitter, I would say, and YouTube. I'm at Aravosis, and you can also find me at YouTube, John Aravosis DC. But honestly, TikTok is where I'm doing most of my work now.
Well, thank you for standing up for Ukraine. It's incredible work, and we need voices like you because we're in a really strange time right now, and we are really fighting for our freedom at both home and abroad. And Ukraine is on the front line of this, and you're bringing these stories out to millions of people. And it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you.